So we're not far from the square of Gettysburg, and of course David Wills and his wife had married in, I believe, 1856, and they purchased this house on the square of Gettysburg. David Wills was, for a time, the superintendent of Adams County Schools. He was a very prominent lawyer, and like I said, I studied under Thaddeus Stevens, and he actually was very interested in politics and helped Governor Curtin during his bid for governor in 1860. The square of Gettysburg was a hub of activity during the battle, and of course during the Gettysburg Address. During the battle, of course, on the first day of the fighting, some 20,000 Northern soldiers retreated through the town. 30,000 Southerners were chasing them. 2,000 people were huddled in their cellars. And all the roads lead to one spot in the center of the town. It was chaos. And of course, during the Gettysburg Address, a lot of people are going to assemble here during the various activities surrounding the address the night before and the morning of the address and during the afternoon after the address. How many people were in town for the Gettysburg Address? No one really knows. The number that's generally given is 15,000. But, you know, we have various estimates. The Chicago Tribune estimated 50,000 people were here. And you know, I always like to point this out about the Gettysburg Address. Whenever do you see the generally accepted figure, the lowest estimate given?
It's reverse reenactor math. You know, they usually triple how many people are going to be there, are there.
Here's the Star and Banner, the local newspaper editor who's trying to pay attention. Our town, of course, was densely crowded. The numbers being present variously estimated from 15 to 30,000. We think it at approximately the latter figure. Hotels were filled to overflowing. Private residences, churches, public buildings were thrown open for the accommodations of the masses. For several days previous, trains came in laden with visitors from all parts of the country. And on the morning of the 19th, every avenue to our town was crowded with vehicles and footmen. The hotels were densely crowded. Hundreds slept upon the floors of the inns and private residences, and hundreds more took a rigid repose in cars and carriages. And Harvey Sweeney, who wrote a pretty nice letter about it afterwards, wrote, "For some days before the 19th, our town was filled with strangers, eager to secure a place to stay during that Memorial Day. All the rooms in the hotels were engaged several weeks ahead, but our town roused up to action. Meetings were held. Committees were appointed to wait on strangers and procure them accommodations in every house, large or small."
And thus Airbnb is born.
Many people didn't sleep, and he just wandered the streets. Luckily, the temperature was not bad. It was much like today. It was an Indian summer-like day, according to some people. And Michael Jacobs, who takes the temperature recording, he said in the morning it was 52 degrees. Okay. Now, the David Wills house across the street would be where Abraham Lincoln and his valet, William Johnson, stayed in a room upstairs, and of course others gathered there too. According to Edward Everett, by that night, after the governor's train arrived, there were 38 people in that house. So maybe the governors didn't attend the dinner, so maybe the dinner that Catherine Wills made for everybody, maybe that was about 25 people. But you get the idea, there were a lot of people.
And if I can here, the dinner was called a feast, okay? But back then, lunch was dinner and dinner was supper. But when they had dinner there, it was a luncheon. I mean, there's just all these dead, I mean, okay, it looks like he's confused too. By the way, the word luncheon, that's dead, right? I mean, we don't say luncheon anymore, do we?
Luncheon. And speaking of confused, you know, we call that the town square. And at the time of the battle, they called it the diamond, but it's actually a circle. Now, during the event, while they're eating dinner, the 5th New York Artillery Band gathered outside the building and started to play songs. And that attracted a lot of people. So we got thousands of people in the town, lots of people don't have any place to stay, and there's a band playing there on the corner of the building. What do you think this area looked like? And right here, I guess starting right there, is the Globe Inn, one of our large hotels. So this was a very happening scene. The crowd starts yelling at the building for Abraham Lincoln to come out and make a few words, to say a few words. But he doesn't really have a speech to give. So newspaper reporters are standing in the crowd, and they do a pretty good job of recording what he says. So I'm going to read, according to the New York Tribune, what he says. He comes out of that door right there on this side of the street and stands right up against the door. I appear before you, fellow citizens, merely to thank you for this compliment. The inference is a very fair one that you would hear me for a while, at least were I to commence to make a speech. I do not appear before you for the purpose of doing so, and for several substantial reasons. The most substantial of those is I have no speech to make. In my position, it is somewhat important that I should not say any foolish things. Voice in the crowd. If you can help it, it very often happens that the only way to help it is to say nothing at all. Believing that is my present condition this evening, I must beg you to excuse me from addressing you further. And he went back inside. And then the band struck up and it played some more. So some people refer to this as Abraham Lincoln's first Gettysburg address. Now, if you guys remember the old wax museum, I wrote a script for them that included that statement by Lincoln coming out and saying that in front of the house. And it was there for about 10 years. And prior to that, someone else had written what Lincoln said. And that, I guess they got a lot of complaints that it was a fictional kind of a rendition of what he said, and so they had me change it a number of years ago. But what they had him say was Lincoln came out, the band was playing, and Lincoln, when the crowd calmed down, Lincoln asked if the band could play his favorite song, Dixie. I don't think that would have went over too good with the reporters there in the crowd. Even though, have you heard that? That comes from some other part of Lincoln's, statements.
That might have been one of those foolish things he didn't want to say.
Yes, yes. So Lincoln spends the night at the Wills house, and while he's there, a couple things happen. One is a telegram arrives explaining to him that Tad is feeling much better. Mary Lincoln did not want the president to attend the ceremonies at Gettysburg because Tad was really sick. And she was concerned because, of course, a year earlier, Willie had died in the White House. And so Lincoln was thinking about maybe not coming. maybe mailing the address in. Get it, mailing it in.
I get it.
Yeah.
I was starting to think up something about Edward. Like, why does Edward keep getting? I mean, he died too. It was just wasn't in the White House.
Yeah. So, but Lincoln does come. He gets a telegram that Tad is feeling better. Apparently, the telegram is sent by Edwin Stanton. And then also when he's in the house, he asked Wills for some writing paper. And this is where we believe that night he changed something in the last few sentences of the speech. I wonder if he threw the other piece of what he had written in the garbage can.
And then somebody said, I should have kept it. It would have been priceless.
Yeah. And then the third thing is, you know, at some point during the night, he wants to go see William Seward. So he actually comes out of the house and actually goes next door and has a meeting with Seward about the speech tomorrow and maybe practices it, reads it to him. But Seward apparently is well versed in what Lincoln's going to say. Lincoln did not write the address on the train. He did not write the address in the Wills house. He had written it in the White House. It had been something he was thinking about for a long time. It was words that were floating around in his head. He had practiced it with people in the White House, and he kept improving it up until, you know, that night, and some people say the next morning. John Deere. And one more thing. One more thing here is that, a couple more things I should say. Lincoln and, you know, all these people are staying in the house. In the middle of the night, the governor's train arrives, and Garry alluded to it. There's talk of putting the governor in bed with Edward Everett. Maybe we didn't get to that yet. Okay. Okay. They want to put Governor Curtin in the same bed with Edward Everett. And Edward Everett is the big wig here at this ceremony, and he will not allow any such thing. So we do have an incident that occurs in the Wills house that night that everyone talks about. Charlotte Wise, Edward Everett's daughter, is in bed with a few other women, and apparently the weight is too much. The bed cracks, and they roll out onto the floor in the middle of the night and wake up the whole household. So now, of course, the National Park Service runs the Wills house, and it's open on a regular basis. I don't see the open flag. I don't know.
Well, it's not like it's a busy weekend.
Yeah. But I'm sure it'll be open this weekend to the public. But you can take the Wills house in, and if you didn't hear this yesterday, Garry worked for a company that was involved in creating all the historical content that's inside the Wills house on the panels. And so I assisted him, and he basically wrote all the panels of text and information that are on the wall in the Wills house when you tour it.
That was a real honor, actually, and I'll give credit to another woman named Amber Moulton, who was also very helpful in that. Let me say a couple other things, and I know Tim might have one other one. We're not telling you which way to walk to our next stop when we do, but you can walk that way or that way over to High Street, and at the corner of Baltimore and High will be the Presbyterian Church, where we'll actually go inside, where it'll hopefully be quieter too. On the way, if you walk that way, you can picture Abraham Lincoln walking around the corner over to the Harper House, which is right past the Wills house on the left there. And for those of you who were there yesterday, you know how he walked, right? Like this, apparently. We learned this yesterday. You will also walk over the brick that denotes the spot where my wife and I met on the town square in 1997. But there's a lot of town square bricks there. The newest bricks there are that one, as well as a few others, and those to the actors in the Gettysburg movie that were just placed there for the 30th anniversary last month. So you might see some stuff over there, but I'm not telling you to walk that way. You can walk however you'd like.
The one thing that's interesting, on the morning of the 19th, we talked about this yesterday for those of you who were there, but all the people in the procession are supposed to meet in the square. They're supposed to arrive here at 9 o'clock and assemble, and they're going to assemble on Carlisle Street, on York Street, and Chambersburg Street, and promptly at 10, the procession will head out down Baltimore Street up to the cemetery where, of course, I'll have the dedication ceremony. Now, the problem was that there are thousands of people in the procession. Apparently, there's like 1,200 military personnel that are in the procession, and then there's a large concourse of other groups that are in the procession. But all the people who were here for the dedication ceremony decided to show up in the center of the town also. So when Ward Lamon, or Layman, who is here for the as a grand marshal, comes out to try to organize the people, it is chaos. It's like the retreat on the first day of the battle in the center of the town. And so he has to get things sorted out. Lincoln comes out at 10 o'clock and gets on a horse and waits there. But he stands there in the crowd just for a horrible amount of time, waiting for the procession to start. And it doesn't get started until, we're not sure, at least a half an hour or more late. And then slowly the procession heads down Baltimore Street. And you can look in many books and you can look at the program and you can see the order of the procession.
And that's going around right now. It's a
was.
lot to read. I don't know if it'll make it to everybody, but it's being handed around right now. Let me say that the Wills House, when I first started coming here, it was a drugstore, and then on top, you took a different entrance to the top and you could see kind of a Lincoln Museum. Here it is during its drugstore years. How many of y'all remember that? There was a couple different ones. You could go over there and check them out. I mean, it's a house right on the square. Talk about the retail possibilities. I mean, look at the House of Bender, the Christmas shop, the Starbucks, I mean, the upper crust pizza. I mean, if you're close to the square, you've got some good stuff going on. You've also got other older pictures showing it partially whitewashed and showing a different drugstore, an earlier drugstore with a different sign. So there's no shortage of stuff, photos that show the square long after the battle. During the battle, we have photos of the square, but not looking at that house. We have so many good things. We have, Everett's correspondence with Wills, but Wills only left behind one account of the whole thing, and that was much later in life. We have so many good things, and yet we're missing so much, including the account Tim is looking for.
It's supposed to open in 5 minutes.
All right, good.
Okay,
Thanks, Mike.
good. So there's a reporter for the Washington Chronicle who detailed the scene as Lincoln just sat there on his horse waiting for this procession to go. Soon, someone proclaimed, 3 cheers for Father Abraham, and they were given with a will. Another call for 3 cheers for the next president of the United States was responded to with no less enthusiasm. In the meantime, the president had mounted and was besieged by an eager crowd thronging around him, anxious for the pleasure of taking him by the hand, while he sat pleasantly enjoying the hearty welcome that spontaneously was accorded him, until the marshals, having mercy upon his oft-wrung arm and weary exertions, caused the crowd to desist and allowed the president to sit in peace upon his horse. And eventually, they get going with this procession and go down Baltimore Street. We're going to talk more about the procession coming up.
We got a couple, sir. Uh-oh, that's 2.
Where in the Wills House William Johnson stayed that night?
I'd imagine there's President Lincoln was given a room, and then beside that room was an extra small room that he was given for his personal use. I'd imagine that's where William Johnson stayed.
The question is, where did William Johnson stay? Second question.
Is it known whether or not Eisenhower ever visited the Wills House?
Did Eisenhower ever visit the Wills House? Tim knows.
No, I'm sure that Eisenhower visited the Lincoln Room Museum. The Lincoln Room Museum, in some form or fashion, had been there since like 1918. And undoubtedly, I'm guessing, he visited. You know, Eisenhower was a big fan of the Hotel Gettysburg. And he ate dinner there often, and he was really good friends with Henry Scharf, the owner. So being there all the time, I'd imagine he spent time in the Lincoln Room, probably for inspiration.
Nice. Sir?
He asked my question.
Wow, well done. Other questions? Sir?
Is that shell real on the wall?
So the building beside it was built by David Wills, I believe, in 1859. And it was a series of businesses that were there. And one of the businesses on the second floor was the Tyson Brothers Photographic Studio. And under the third window from the square on the second level, there's an artillery shell sticking out of the building. And it's possible that the shell has been taken out and put back in after they emptied the powder out. But that shell has been in that building as long as anyone can remember. And there's actually an account from after the battle that that shell hit the building during the fighting. And, you know, whether it's been taken out and the powder emptied out and put back in, it's been there ever since the battle. And it's one of 9 buildings in the town that have artillery shells sticking out of them to this day.
And in case somebody isn't familiar with it, third window over right below it. So third window from the right, just below it, you can see the black dot with the mortar around it. Good question.
Good.
Anything else?
Good. Was I going to mention? The other thing I was going to mention is at the Wills house is after the cemetery dedication, there's a luncheon at the Wills house. So not only does Catherine Smizer Wills, Jenny, not only does she prepare a lavish feast, you know, the next morning she has breakfast for all these people at her house before the procession, and then that afternoon she commences a luncheon for all the dignitaries returning to her house. So she is very busy, and she has ladies working with her or servants that work at the house, but again, she's 8 months pregnant at the time. Okay.
And it seems that she has 3 servants, according to, I think, the 1870 census, which someone at the Adams County Historical Society looked up yesterday during our talk. I guess that was more interesting than the talk itself. So we found 3 white women between 17 and 25, I think, that worked for them as servants. Still sounds like a lot of work for a feast for 38, a breakfast, and then a luncheon.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. To stay up to date on all the latest and coolest videos, please subscribe to the Trust's YouTube channel. Preserve, educate, inspire.